Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank you all for coming and participating in this meeting. And I'm going to switch to Arabic, so if anyone wants to fix the headset. السيدات والسادة.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning, I would like to thank Her Excellency, Mrs. Michelle Bachelet, High Commissioner for Human Rights, for her participation in this important event and her concern with the issues related with achieving peace and security and elevating the principles of justice per the goals of the United Nations. It is with pleasure to participate again with Her Highness the Minister Aurelia Frick, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Culture and Education in the state of Liechtenstein, the ally in this common effort that stems from a collective effort to resist crimes that are against humanity, war crimes, and other even more dangerous crimes, regardless of the culprits, and the importance that we attribute to answer for humans and principles and to achieve justice for the victims and our care for contributing to reach peace and safe political transition in Syria. I would also like to express my gratitude to the judge, Catherine Márki-Öhel, the head of the international mechanism to help the prosecution of those who are responsible on the dangerous crimes committed in Syria since March 2011, and also the leadership group for all the efforts exerted to implement the international mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, the international community seeks a political solution in Syria per the United Nations decision number 2254, and it is without doubt that justice is an important part of the sustainable solution. But it is proven to us day after day that the judicial system in Syria is unable or unwilling in prosecuting any party that committed war crimes or crimes against humanity in Syria. Also, there has not been enough measures taken to solve this problem from the Security Council. And so we have to stress for the importance of international mechanism that's neutral and independent, that corroborate the efforts that aim to try to reach a solution for the Syrian crisis and remove all obstacles for sustainable and successful solution and for the political transition and national accord. Also, these mechanisms are clear and go in accord with the principles of the United Nations and the international law and the majority of the will of the international community. We expect the rumors regarding the chemicals weapons that would be used against the civilians demands all effort to question. Ladies and gentlemen, the international community is concerned with this matter, and this is manifested with the participation of nations from around the world in funding the mechanism. It is also clear in the meeting held by the General Committee last April to discuss the first report that was presented by the international mechanism. The success of the international mechanism it depends on a few, and we admonish the member nations to offer all the information and evidence that they have, and along the line, we welcome with the international mechanism to coordinate with the investigation committee in Syria. And we stress on the importance of the cooperation and coordination between the international mechanism and the civilian community with the connection with the Márki-Öhel, with the connection with all the non-government Syrian institutions, and we welcome all the other mechanism in last April. And we also welcome the contribution and the participation between the different mechanisms, which will help reaching justice and find justice for the victims. Ladies and gentlemen, it is without doubt that funding is an important role for the mechanism to be able to achieve its goals and achieve its sovereignty and independence. And independence for funding has an important in this phase that we are in. It is counting on the nations and based on the United Nations Decision 248. And this is what we look forward to for the help of all the member states. And per that, we thank all the nations that offered financial funding for the international mechanism. And we ask for all voluntary donations and keeping all the financial support. As for our part, the contribution of the state of Qatar reached $1 million. We look forward to the implementation of the international mechanism and reaching results which would aid to achieving justice, peace, and sustainability in Syria. And we look forward to listening to all your remarks regarding this topic. Thank you.
The Minister, Foreign Minister of Liechtenstein, Mrs. Frick. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Madam High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's great to have a full room. Thank you for coming. 2 years ago, with an all-out assault on Aleppo looming, we gathered in New York to discuss accountability options in Syria. In the following weeks, we witnessed the brutality of the onslaught on the city of Aleppo and the total disregard for civilian lives and the most basic rules of warfare. The international outrage over this appalling attack on civilians helped to spark action in the General Assembly. In an intense process of consultations, we were able to draft the mandate of the international impartial and independent mechanism to assist in the investigation and prosecution of persons responsible for the most serious crimes under international law committed in the Syria Arab Republic since March 2011, usually referred to as the IIIM. One of our most trusted partners in this process was the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It is therefore a particular pleasure to welcome the new High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, among us today. Thank you for being here. In December 2016, an overwhelming majority of states voted in favor of the creation of the IIIM, a decisive step towards ensuring justice in Syria. 2 years later, in the situation in Idlib is a sad reminder of those weeks in 2016. There are again stark warnings of a looming humanitarian disaster for the UN system, very serious concerns about the potential loss of life, and appeals to respect international humanitarian law. But today, we are also having this discussion in a very different framework. Accountability is no longer elusive, but something that we have given ourselves the tools to realize. After adoption of the GA resolution, things rapidly moved forward. The UN team, under the leadership of Secretary General Guterres, moved swiftly towards implementation. States responded strongly and positively, both by extending political support and by providing resources to the IIIM. Civil society embraced this new international criminal justice mechanism. And very soon, the IIIM, under the strong leadership of Markki-Öhel, was fully operational. I wish to thank Catherine for her outstanding work. She is leading the IIIM with a firm hand and as well with great efficiency. Accountability for the crimes committed in Syria is now within reach. We are seeing investigations and prosecutions in European courts. States are sharing information with the IIIM. Things are moving in the right direction. Accountability is a prerequisite for sustainable peace in Syria. In the developing tasks about the possible post-conflict period and possible reconstruction efforts, accountability for the crimes committed is crucial. Measures taken by the government, especially the notorious Law Number 10 and the issuance of death certificates, on which we have notified the UN Security Council and the General Assembly, together with so many of you gathered here, are alarming signs. The IIIN can pave the way to accountability, but it is only us states who can make sure that it really succeeds. So, I would like to first hand over the floor to the Human Rights Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Minister, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, colleagues, and friends. The past 7.5 years in Syria constitute a tragedy. Crimes of historic proportions have been perpetrated. The death toll in the hundreds of thousands, innumerable people have been wounded, and more than half the people in the country have been forced to leave their homes. When their places of refuge themselves come under attack, terrified families are again forced to flee, sometimes multiple times, and their vulnerability grows. These are among the people who are now crowded into Idlib in desperation and fear. Again and again, my office and the Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry, which we support, have reported clear indication that parties to the conflict, including the Syrian government, have failed to consistently respect the fundamental principles of international humanitarian law. Intrinsically indiscriminate weapons have been used by warring parties to attack civilian areas. As reported by the Commission of Inquiry and the now defunct Joint Investigative Mechanism, government forces and ISILs have used chemical weapons against civilians, and sometimes repeatedly. Sieges have trapped hundreds of thousands of people in enforced starvation, a tactic prohibited under international law. Civilian sites such as hospitals and clinics, schools, markets, and bakeries have been bombed again and again by Syrian and pro-government forces, systematically decimating humanitarian services and the infrastructure of community. The delivery of essential humanitarian assistance has been repeatedly denied. My office has received no credible evidence of any party to the conflict holding to account any personnel or forces under their command for those or other violations. ISIL unleashed a campaign of violence in 2014 which amounted to genocide against the Yazidi community, including through sexual slavery and other severe abuses against women and girls. This appalling suffering continues to this day, and thousands of children, women, and men are still missing with the situations unknown. The atrocities committed by ISIL and other non-state actors in the course of this conflict will be indelibly engraved in the history of our era. Like other horrors, such as the widespread and systematic torture and ill treatment of detainees and the enforced disappearance of 10,000 of people by state or not state forces, these torments cry out for justice. Impunity and denial of what has occurred cannot be viewed as somehow the price to pay for political stability. In reality, they are a recipe for deepening grievances, which, like dry gunpowder, can ignite at any time. Excellencies, in the face of this vast and terrible pain, we must first look to the victims. Recently, many Syrian families received death notices for relatives who, over the past 8 years, have been arrested, detained, or disappeared. They and the relatives of all those who have been disappeared need to know what happened to their loved ones and where they lie. Their anguish echoes the experience of many people in my own region, Latin America. Our recent history demonstrates that if there is to be durable reconciliation and peace, justice must not be denied. Alongside the imperative prosecutions of perpetrators, there need to be processes to acknowledge the truth and address and repair root causes. Argentina has worked long and hard to confront past violations, including the disappearance of some 30,000 people in the 70s and the 80s. Excuse me. Although the path to justice has not been always easy, hundreds of prosecutions have taken place. Truth-seeking processes and reparation for victims and their families have also played an essential role in beginning to reshape a respectful and cohesive society. These processes continue, and recently, the discovery of the 128th disappeared grandchild was announced. The people of my own country, Chile, also demanded justice for the massive human rights violation which occurred between 1973 and 1990, and we too embark on large-scale and consequential truth-telling procedures to identify victims and acknowledge the crimes committed against them and perpetrators brought to justice. And this is important. I'm a medical doctor, so I always say this is like an injury. If the injury is not clean, it will never heal. Also, a lot of measures, including reparations, were put in place for victims and the families of victims. After a half-century of war, Colombia's peace agreement provides for the establishment of a comprehensive system, truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. This includes both judicial and extrajudicial mechanisms and offers historical opportunity to rebuild a society that acknowledges and addresses both the needs of the victims and the root causes of the conflict. Groundbreaking trials have been taking place in Guatemala for officials at the highest levels of the military. In February 2016, a national court ruled that charges of sexual slavery against indigenous Quechua women during the armed conflict qualifies as crimes against humanity. In May this year, another court decision found 4 high-ranking members of the military guilty of crimes against humanity and forced disappearance and rape, exposing the chain of command responsible for these crimes. In these countries and around the world, comprehensive transitional justice approaches, including national consultations, truth-seeking, reparation programs, institutional reform, as well as prosecutions, have been fundamental to moving forward towards reconciliation. They have helped to rebuild political system, address broken relationships across society, and renew a sense of a common national identity and common social fabric. And this is my deepest hope for Syria. My office and our many partners are making every effort to ensure that the perpetrators of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and serious human rights violations will one day be brought to justice. We have supported the establishment and operationalization of the international, impartial, and independent mechanism to assist in the investigation and prosecution of those responsible for the most serious crimes under international law committed in the Syrian Arab Republic, an innovative and powerfully relevant body mandated by General Assembly. The IIM mechanism could become a model for other regions, for example, to address the crimes committed against the Rohingyas in Myanmar. We're working with the IIM to bridge the gap from human rights fact-finding to criminal investigation of the alleged perpetrators of crimes in Syria. Alongside this effort to ensure impartial and effective justice for the perpetrator of the most severe crime, it is also vital that any eventual talks to reconcile the parties and establish peace in Syria have at their core the need for truth, with respect for the victims, and together with programs that care for their needs. I urge the international community to work together to secure a nationwide ceasefire and launch credible processes which can end this senseless conflict and deliver peace, justice, and truth to the Syrian people. Thank you.
High Commissioner, many thanks for your remark, and your attendance in this busy week as well shows the strong commitment of your office for the mechanism. We all know that you must have a very busy schedule as many others, so thank you for having been here for your opening remarks. I would now like to give the floor to Catherine Marchi-Uel, the head of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism. Catherine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Minister. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here with you today to update you on the progress in the work of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism for Syria. I will update you on the main challenges we are facing and the opportunities ahead. In August, the mechanism submitted its second report to the General Assembly, which outlines the progress we have made regarding operational and policy priorities. The report also sets out the steps that the mechanism has taken to address key challenges identified in the previous reporting period, including strategies to deal with a significant volume and varied types of documentation on crimes committed in Syria with a view to supporting criminal prosecutions. Among the most important developments are the operationalization of the mechanism and the acceleration of its substantive work. As required by our terms of reference, we have now acquired a state-of-the-art evidence management system which allows the mechanism to store and preserve considerable volumes of material, including large amounts of images and video material in a safe manner and according to the highest standards of security. Protecting the information collected, including sensitive data of victims and witnesses, has been a key priority for the mechanism from the very start. With the system now in place, the mechanism has progressed significantly in the collection of information and evidence from a variety of sources, including UN entities, civil society, states, and individuals, and other actors. This is in line with the mechanism's vocation to become a central repository of the evidence concerning crimes in Syria, which is possible given the mechanism's broad mandate, its dedicated focus, and capacity to access material from a wide range of sources. To date, the mechanism has collected around 40 terabytes of data, consisting of almost 900,000 records. Pursuant to a memorandum of understanding concluded with the Commission of Inquiry on Syria in March of this year, we have now accessed the vast majority of the Commission's holdings, which is currently being reviewed and tagged. Procedures are also in place for the mechanism to receive periodic installments of material collected in the future by the Commission. Other collection plans are focused on the acquisition of material held by other documenting entities known to be of high value for our mandate or for which there were pressing preservation needs. The mechanism has identified the need for a structural investigation to ensure a broad contextual understanding of the situation in Syria. This includes the cultural, historical, and gender dimension of crimes, contextual elements of those crimes, the existence of patterns of crimes, as well as the structure of powers and links between crimes and individuals. This principal strategic framework is also intended to guide our collection of information and evidence and to advance our work on the building of case files in an efficient and coordinated way. Among our key priorities is supporting national jurisdictions' efforts to investigate and prosecute crimes committed in Syria. To this end, the mechanism is continuing its proactive engagement with National War Crimes Unit in various states, both directly as well as in the context of relevant fora, such as the European Union Genocide Network hosted by Eurojust in the Netherlands, in The Hague. We are also ensuring that the material we collect can be made available rapidly to assist national prosecution authorities. To date, we have received and are currently processing 7 requests from national prosecuting authorities. We are now prioritizing the allocation of resources for the collection, processing, and analytical work, and we expect that our capacity to assist national jurisdiction with ongoing investigation and prosecutions will increase significantly in the coming months. In parallel, we are advancing the first stage of the work on building our own case file, and we have the ambition of having 2 case files open before the end of this year. The mechanism has already been developing internal strategies, policies, and standard operation procedures in various areas. These include data management, responding to the growing number of requests for assistance, as well as developing thematic frameworks, such as addressing sexual and gender crimes as core part of our work. We continue to engage with a broad range of stakeholders and other interlocutors. With regard to UN entities, in addition to the Commission of Inquiry, we are identifying concrete opportunities for coordination and cooperation with other entities, including, where possible, access to their relevant material. Prospect of collaboration between the mechanism and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons are also very promising, following the decision of OPCW's Conference of State Parties on 27th of June. According to this decision, the Secretariat of the OPCW shall preserve and provide information to the mechanism. I am pleased to report that yesterday, the mechanism and the OPCW signed a memorandum of understanding, which will allow the mechanism to access considerable amount of information and evidence in the OPCW's possession, including material collected by its fact-finding mission. The mechanism is also continuing to engage extensively with civil society, including with Syrian and international NGOs. Allow me to acknowledge the challenging operating environment in which Syrian civil society has been working, including during recent months. I would like to commend the effort of those organizations which, despite the urgencies flowing from the dire humanitarian situation on the ground, are striving to advance the accountability process through genuine cooperation with us. In line with our commitment to ensuring a two-way communication with civil society actors, in particular Syrian NGOs, we are pursuing our dialogue both one-to-one as well as in group settings. On 3rd of April in Lausanne, the mechanism and 28 Syrian NGOs, including those represented by my colleagues on this panel, signed a protocol of collaboration outlining a set of overarching principles to guide mutual engagement. The protocol aims at promoting mutual understanding regarding opportunities of collaboration, which goes well beyond pure documentation, in furtherance of our common goal of ensuring accountability for crimes in Syria. We're also engaging with NGOs working on case building with a view to bringing cases before national jurisdiction. We're exploring areas of collaboration and maximizing common efforts without encroaching on our requirement of independence and impartiality. We are also continuing our engagement with states regarding a broad range of areas, from witness protection to the provision of relevant information and evidence. Several states have indicated the need to conclude a memorandum of understanding to this end, which we are currently drafting. Regarding operational priorities, we have identified a suitable office space that offers security and operational features required for our work in the long term. We are currently working with UNOG officials on a relocation to the new premises within the end of 2018. We are also progressing steadily with the recruitment of staff with priority to Arabic-speaking staff, with a view to increase significantly our in-house analytical capacities in the short term. We aim to have around 40 staff by the end of this year and to reach 60 staff to be full capacity between March and May of next year. On funding, following the call by the General Assembly for the Secretary General to include necessary funding for the mechanism in the next budget proposal, we are developing deliverables and indicators, as well as working with UN budget officials to prepare a draft budget for 2020. As expected, the mechanism's resource requirement for 2020 will exceed the approximately 14 million estimated for 2018. To cover the cost of its operationalization and the impact of emerging factors, several $1 million will be required annually in addition to the original budget estimates. Despite the many changes, we are working to keep our budget submission for 2020 within reasonable framework and to adopt strategies that would maximize returns for investment of funds from member states in the accountability process for Syria. In the meantime, for as long as it must rely on voluntary contribution, it is critical that the mechanism be granted the funds needed to further its work. While pledges for 2018 have been encouraging, the budget for 2019 remains largely unfunded. The mechanism's immediate needs, including completion of the acquisition of the information management system and moving to our new premises within the year, will require substantial expenditures in the next 3 months. This means that we cannot plan for important surplus from the 2018 budget to be reallocated for next year. As a consequence, we strongly rely on additional funding to be able to continue working in 2019. Let me conclude with a call to you, states, supporters of the mechanism, and all member states of the United Nations, to commit until the mechanism receives sufficient regular budget funding, extra-budgetary funding, to ensure that we can operate at our budgeted level, to ensure swift and effective changes to national legislative frameworks as required to facilitate cooperation or other engagement with the mechanism, to share relevant information and evidence on international crimes committed in Syria, including material previously provided to the UN OPCW Joint Investigative Mechanism, to facilitate access to their territory by the mechanism, for states hosting Syrian refugee communities to provide information and facilitate introduction with domestic agencies and local actors that are relevant to our work, to consider entering into cooperative agreements with the mechanism to provide witness protection and support services, And finally, to promote, in the context of donor funding, decisions for civil society coordination with the mechanism. As the situation on the ground evolves and as the fear of further suffering looms in the background, the need to fight impunity for the crimes committed in Syria is stronger than ever. My team and I are firm in our commitment to ensure that the mechanism can meaningfully contribute to accountability for such crimes. We count on your support, and I thank you for your attention and look forward to our exchange. Thank you.
Catherine, many thanks for this very comprehensive and interesting brief. We have, I think, all heard as well the words in terms of what you said in relation to the budget. But I think after your briefing, no, we are in the right hands and of your dedication as well. I would now like to give the floor to the Executive Director of the Syria Justice and Accountability Center, Mr. Mohammed Abdallah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for having us here today, and thanks, Catherine Marcial, for your brief update on the progress of the IIIM. We meet here another year after 7 years plus the 8th year of the conflict in Syria, where human rights situation is deteriorating more and more, and where we see more violations in Syria, and we see an end of hope for some of the Syrians on the ground, with the Syrian government recapturing some of the territories on the ground and pushing all the opponents to one area and preparing to launch an attack on the area. The recapture of the areas was taken before by the opposition, provided a new context for us, a new reality, difficulty to access these areas and more difficulty to bring documentation from these areas that were recaptured by the Syrian government. Areas like Dar'a, Ghouta, and in northern Aleppo remains or became more difficult to reach and more difficult to access and get information from there. Meanwhile, the Syrian government issuing death certificates for people who were arrested and tortured and killed, and their bodies were hidden somewhere in Syria, to families through civil registries. We've seen also the law number 10 trying to expropriate properties from Syrians to kind of endorse the demographic change the government did through pushing its opponents to Idlib. We've also witnessed a Russian active campaign try to force the refugees to go back to Syria in conditions that's neither safe and nor voluntary. So what can we do all? We have the IIIM and we have other venues for justice and accountability. These setbacks and new realities should not really deter us from continuing our advocacy for justice and accountability. Rather, it should push us actually to adopt more creative thinking and creative ways of working, including employing some of the technology and new approaches applying technology to our work. Satellite imageries, for example, could be one way to solve some of the access the issues. And another idea is having the government who's filming Syria on active daily basis through their drones declassify some of this information and share them with the IIIM, as they could be actually good base of information for mass graves and for population transfer. IIIM, while IIIM is very important pillar of justice, and while the work of the Syrian civil society is also in partnership with the IIIM is very important, the role of the universal jurisdiction through the national prosecution in Europe is also important, but all these mechanisms remain limited to a certain level without having the appropriate jurisdiction that can address the mass violations happened in Syria. When we talk about justice and accountability, a justice that provides redress and closure to victims in Syria, we do not talk about prosecuting 5 people or 2 people or a lower-level soldier who made it to Europe as a refugee. And we do not talk necessarily about abstentia trial, abstentia arrest warrant against any leader in the security agencies. These progresses are really important and great, but it's not sufficient. And that's why I want to support the statement from the High Commissioner on Human Rights that we have to look also to the comprehensive approach of transitional justice, not only criminal prosecution. The new reality on the ground and the limitation in criminal prosecution all imposes itself, and that leads us all to think how we can accomplish other elements of justice that complementary to criminal prosecution, but also can help families feel redressed and provide closure to families. Programs in truth for victims, programs on disappeared and forced disappearances in Syria, mechanisms for property restitution, and also measures for institutional reform are all ideas could be implemented hand in hand with the work of IIIM, with the work with national prosecutors in Europe. But all these mechanisms could not be proceeded without having them mentioned, highlighted, and agreed upon in a peace agreement. In one way, we have the whole, or the most of the international community here, supporting the IIIM, providing funding, working with their prosecutors for criminal accountability, for justice, and for redress for victims. Meanwhile, we have a peace negotiation process. Do not prioritize justice and accountability. Do not put victim priorities and interests on the top of its interest. We do not hear from the Special Envoy, Staffan de Mistura, any commitment to justice and accountability. There's, of course, mention to detainees towards the end of every statement, but that's not sufficient. So we want to invite all of you to work with us, pressuring the negotiation process more to include justice and accountability and to include elements of accountability and participation of victims. Finally, one final comment is that it's unfortunate to hear from Catherine that the funding for 2019 has not really been secured, and we want to endorse the request by IIIM, the IIIM to be moved to the UN funding, provided that we want to continue the support and continue our cooperation as well with the IIIM, and we look forward to our next Lausanne meeting in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one more panelist, and then I'm going to open the floor. I have a very challenging task because we have not too much time left, and we have a couple of ministers and a lot of 20 interventions to take place. So if I can kindly try to remind you to limit your statement to 2 minutes. And please, first of all, the last panelist, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to start by thanking everyone in attendance today and everyone who made this event possible. I would also be amiss not to thank the state of Qatar and Liechtenstein and everyone and every state that support the path of accountability in my home country, Syria. Since the very months of popular uprising for democracy, we are in Syrian Network for Human Rights diligently on releasing reports that tackle the crimes against humanity perpetrated by the Syrian regime in various patterns of violations. Releasing on November 23rd, 2011, the report by the Commission of Inquiry confirmed the Syrian regime implication. This entailed the implication of its allies, given that they have provided support in accordance with the international law for the regime that committed crimes against humanity. To this day, those states have been supplying the Syrian regime with militias and weapons as they are partners in those crimes. On the other hand, the Syrian regime and its allies have been determined completely crushing and dominating the country since the very first months, knowing full well that this was the only way to avoid accountability, which was the reason why those states interfered directly by sending their forces, who were also directly involved with the Syrian regime in committing hundreds of war crimes. The Syrian lands were completely taken, and over the Syrian people were silent. Even if the Syrian lands were completely taken and the Syrian people were silenced, the path of justice and accountability would go on, and stopping us is not something in your power. Our employee and volunteer at SNHR have been working tirelessly since 2011 as we collected hundreds of thousands of pieces of data, information, and we developed complex program. After 8 years of continued work, SNHR possesses a database contains names, pictures, and data for 250,000 of Syrian civilians that have been killed since the start of popular uprising. We also complete a database containing names of 95,000 Syrian citizens, 95,000 of Syrian citizens who were forcibly disappeared. We don't know whether they are alive or dead. In addition, we have database containing 14,000 names of Syrians who died due to torture, and also data on 830 medical facilities, 1,360 schools, 580 markets, and 221 incidents of chemical weapons, and other types of violation. Actually, my goal from narrating all of those to say that this is not estimation at all, but this is rather than of database supported by information, and supported by information and different types of testimony from the family direct primary source. There is actually debate that the accountability is only for the family and victims themselves, but I'm saying here that the accountability is for us as a human rights defender, for my colleague at COI and the IIM, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and many others who have worked on defending human rights in Syria, as well as the state who support the path of justice in Syria. As SNHR, we go by motto, no justice without accountability. And if I might add no truth without accountability, no dignity without accountability, no transitional justice without accountability, and no democratic transition without accountability. My second and final point, as bear to the time, the Syrian community has been subjected to all of these violations, and large portion of these violations are documented in details with hundreds of thousands of pictures, videos. Accountability is not optional, but rather an inevitability for the Syrian people. It is the backbone of the democratic transition. In addition, the international law prohibits amnesty for perpetrators of serious crimes, such as crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes. International mechanisms should interfere to ensure level of accountability, as we have listening to many shameful initiatives asking Syrian people to accept a bare minimum standard of security and livelihood in exchange of impunity for the criminals. This insulting recipe will only bear the Syrian conflict to no end. The Syrian people will continue to be faithful to their demands for freedom, dignity, and democracy, using all forms of peaceful resistance. The Syrian regime and its allies' impunity, which was in large afforded by the Russian protection at Security Council through vetoing any resolution that aims to refer the case in Syria to the ICC, has incited the Syrian regime not only to keep perpetrating heinous crimes, but also to rise the scale and level of violence, and finally to do all that while bargaining about being able to do whatever they want to the Syrian people. The immunity has generated a negative reaction from the Syrian people and in the Middle East region, and it will encourage more sadistic individuals to copy the Syrian regime experience against their people. Finally, I have two recommendations that 8 long, severe years has passed, but all the pain and the crimes will not be forgotten. The past must be redressed by acknowledging the suffering of the victims and then archiving repression through accountability. The IIM was an advanced exceptional step in this regard. We call on the states that support the IIM and the path of accountability in Syria to move forward another step by establishing a special tribunal in Syria under a resolution by the UN General Assembly. Second, the states that have signed the Geneva Convention are obliged to fight crimes against humanity and war crime. As such, the states have universal jurisdiction, need to make more effort toward submitting cases in a wider scope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the founder of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. I now open the floor, and the first speaker on my list is Didier Reynders, the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs from Belgium. Didier, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And allow me first to address a special word of gratitude to Liechtenstein and Qatar to organize this side event, and to Mrs. Catherine Márki-Öhel and her team for the great work they have done over the last few months. The International Independent and Impartial Mechanism for Syria is now fully operational. And ladies and gentlemen, we are united in our belief that achieving accountability in Syria will end the perpetual cycle of violence and will need to be a part of any future political settlement. It's up to all of us to support the IIIM in building and bridging cases against perpetrators before any competent tribunal. Belgium is currently in the process of modifying its national legislation to facilitate cooperation with the IIIM. We are in close contact with the mechanism to that end and invite all other states to also take steps in this direction. Belgium has already conducted several legal proceedings against fighters returning from Syria. Just one example, the Belgian court recently convicted Mr. Hakim El-Wasaki to 28 years imprisonment after he confessed to a stage-taking and a murder in Syria over a telephone conversation with his girlfriend. And there are many other cases for the moment before some tribunals. Ladies and gentlemen, the use of chemical weapons is inherently immoral, indiscriminated, and constitutes a war crime. Impunity for such an abhorrent attack is unacceptable. We highly regret the vetoes blocking the renewal of the joint investigation mechanism of the OPCW and the UN to investigate the use of chemical weapons in Syria. However, our resolve to seek justice for these crimes is strong, and recently we took an important step by creating an attribution mechanism under the auspices of the OPCW to investigate and identify those responsible for the use of chemical weapons in Syria, including the latest chemical weapons attack on the 7th April in Douma. This new attribution mechanism will continue the work the joint investigation mechanism was sadly unable to finish. Today we commend steps taken by the OPCW's Technical Secretariat to operationalize the attribution mechanism as soon as possible. And I also want to highlight, like you have said, Catherine, the important decision of the Conference of State Parties of the OPCW to authorize the organization to share information with the IIIM. Two last comments. Of course, the mechanism is still dependent on voluntary contributions. I'm proud that Belgium has already contributed close to $1.6 million to the mechanism. However, in order for it to be sustainable in the long run, securing funding through the regular UN budget remains crucial. I welcome the UNSG's commitment to propose funding for the IIIM in its budget proposal for the year 2020 and call on all of you to support this proposal should it be an issue of discussion in the General Assembly's Fifth Committee. And the last comment, achieving accountability in Syria is an uphill battle. Several vetoes blocking action by the Security Council on accountability have shielded perpetrators who are still in Syria from accountability. On the institutional level, the Syria case demonstrates the validity of initiatives, including the one spearheaded by France and Mexico, to limit the use of the veto power by the permanent members of the UN Security Council in mass atrocity situations. Belgium supports this initiative, as well as the Code of Conduct of the ACT Group regarding Security Council action against genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. I'll call on all of you to join these initiatives so that justice should never take this long again. We owe it to the millions of victims of Syria. And thank you for your attention.
Many thanks goes to Belgium. I would now like to give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland, Timo Soini, and can I kindly ask all the speakers again to limit your statements to 2 minutes. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Aurelia. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have again witnessed horrific scenes from Syria, constant brutal violations of human rights and international humanitarian law happen with impunity. Finland is a true advocate for the rule-based international system, and it is clear for us that impunity for the crimes committed in Syria is not an option. Peace cannot be achieved without justice, and justice requires both redress for victims and accountability of perpetrators. It is justice that we owe to the Syrian people, and this gives us a reason to advance international efforts in order to guarantee accountability for international crimes. The value of the IIIM cannot be undermined, even if it is not a tribunal or has any authority to prosecute crimes. The mechanism is doing important work bridging the gap between recent crimes and uncertain future prosecutions. The mechanism can provide assistance to states in their efforts in prosecuting on a national level those responsible for international crimes in Syria. The latest Syria Commission inquiry report on sexual and gender-based violence tells us a devastating story about the reality and the violence committed by all parties to the conflict. The mandate of the IIIM clearly notes the special attention needed for sexual crimes as well as crimes against children. This focus is needed. Finland is one of the first countries to financially support the mechanism to ensure its operability. The IIIM requires our full support and attention also in the future, and my country's commitment will not be fading. Regarding long-term resourcing for the IIIM, Finland underlines the importance of funding from the UN budget to ensure focused and effective functioning of the mechanism. Thank you. It was 2 minutes, 20 seconds.
Timo, many thanks for your statement and especially for the continuous support and as well for advocating to get it into the ordinary UN budget, and the same goes to Belgium as well. I would now like to give the floor to the next speaker. It is Stef Blok, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. You have the floor.
I would like, first of all, to thank you and the Minister of Qatar for your ongoing commitment to IIIM and the fight against impunity. And I would also like to thank Ms. Markey-Uehel for her work and the presentation you gave today. It is the work that you are doing that will ultimately ensure that those responsible for the most serious crimes committed in Syria will be held accountable and bring justice to the victims. The work of the mechanism is an ongoing and long-term process that will require our continued commitment, and the Netherlands will continue to promote collaboration of the international community with the mechanism. Because we need to work together, and ensuring long-term sustainable funding should be a key priority of us as like-minded states. And in addition, we need to work together and put in place the necessary framework for the prosecutors to share information with the mechanism. So therefore, we continue our efforts to collaborate with other states and partners on the IIIM. On the bilateral and multilateral level, it is of vital importance that we all stay committed, that we work together to make this a success. This was less than 2 minutes.
Stef, many thanks for your intervention. I would now like to give the floor to Czech Republic.
Thank you, Aurelia. I would like to also express our gratitude to Qatar and Liechtenstein for organizing this meeting, which is very important at this current situation, especially when we can expect some developments in Syria, and there are still threats of violent actions in the region of Idlib. Let me say that the Czech Republic strongly condemns serious violations and abuses of human rights and all violations of international humanitarian law which has been taking place in Syria over the past years. Without doubt, a comprehensive accountability process to punish perpetrators is needed. This need to happen impartially and irrespective of developments in the Syrian peace process. And it is not necessary only because of the justice itself, but in order to prevent recurrence of future crimes in the future. Let me say that we continue to be of the opinion that the ICC would have been the best suited international judicial body to exercise its jurisdiction in Syria. It is regrettable that the will in the United Nations Security Council for a referral is lacking at the moment. However, in the absence of the ICC's jurisdiction, the III mechanism has a very important role to play, and we fully support the work of Catherine and his team. Its progress is self-evident, and it's moving successfully from preparation to its operation phase. In this sense, we are eager to hear the upcoming report to the General Assembly, which is supposed to be during the fall, if I'm right. Then I would like to also stress the need to solve the financial resources for the work of III mechanism. The Czech Republic is fully committed to voluntarily contribute. We are currently discussing our contribution for the next year, and let me close with a short statement that if we are to help this in Syria, we need to also focus on the issue of political process which is taking place, and to facilitate the political process through quick creation of constitutional committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister from Czech Republic. I would now like to give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. You have the floor.
Thank you. I would like to thank Liechtenstein and Qatar for organizing this side event, giving us an opportunity to discuss how to best to ensure justice in Syria and achieve sustainable peace. Estonia welcomes the second report of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism for Syria and commends the work of the mechanism, which continues to function in a complex international environment. Work of the mechanism and its reports enjoy our full support. Estonia stresses the important role of the mechanism in documenting human rights violations and gathering evidence in view of the future legal action. We consider that the fight against impunity for the most serious crimes is critical to ensure fair and just society by holding perpetrators accountable and to ensure justice for victims. Estonia is willing to cooperate with the mechanism inter alia to share relevant evidentiary and other material in accordance with international law and our own national legislation. It is crucial that the mechanism will share its information only with those jurisdictions that respect humanitarian law, international human rights law and standards, including the right to fair trial. In prospects of justice for Syria and to ensure respect for international criminal law, we call on all parties involved in the conflict to demonstrate a sense of responsibility and fully cooperate with the mechanism to assist the investigation and prosecution of persons responsible for committed war crimes in the Syrian Arab Republic. Continued violation of international humanitarian law in Syrian Arab Republic has been a result of political standoff in the UN Security Council, which has led to a culture of impunity. Permanent members of the Council should voluntarily and collectively commit themselves not using their veto to block Council action aimed at preventing or ending situations involving mass atrocity crimes, including the use of chemical weapons. And now the same Council member is so-called mediating the return of refugees to Syria. We cannot turn a blind eye on it and encourage the return of people to the country under the same regime, which has committed such atrocities and crimes against its own people. The return must be safe, dignified, and first of all, voluntary, under UN-led framework only, and once conditions allow, when the genuine and inclusive political transition is firmly underway and the rights of the people are protected, to return to the country where they can have justice. We reiterate our support for referral by the UN Security Council of the situation of Syria to the International Criminal Court in order to guarantee that all victims would receive justice and to ensure accountability for international crimes committed in Syria. In order for the mechanism to be able to perform its mandate efficiently and make the prospect of justice for victims a reality, it is needed to ensure the funding from the regular UN budget. The existence and well-operating mechanism is a clear message of the accountability efforts. We would like to thank Ms. Catherine Mashie-Hill, head of the mechanism, for her dedicated work and wish her and the mechanism success in their ongoing efforts to investigate the most serious crimes committed in the Syrian Arab Republic. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I would now like to give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Georgia.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Madam Chair. Well, thank you very much for organizing this very important event, and of course, thanks a lot to the presenters who have provided a very insightful and important information, including regarding the situation on the ground. The ongoing conflict in Syria has led to enormous sufferings of the Syrian people. Up to 500,000 of people fell victim to this conflict, while millions have been displaced over the past 7 years. In continuation of Assad regime's constant violation of the fundamental norms and principles of international law, I have to mention that on 29th of May of 2018, the regime made another illegal decision and established the so-called diplomatic ties with the Russian occupation regimes in Sukhumi and Skin Valley. With this act, the Assad regime declared its support to Russia's military aggression against Georgia, the illegal occupation of Georgia's indivisible regions of Abkhazia and Skin Valley region, and the ethnic cleansing that has been taking place for years on these territories. In response, Georgia broke off the diplomatic relationships with Syria. At the same time, we are extremely concerned over the continued impunity for the grave violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law perpetrated by the Assad regime on a continuous basis. Against this backdrop, Georgia fully supports the establishment of the international impartial and independent mechanism, IIIM, mandated by the UNGA Resolution 71/248, aimed at assisting the investigation and prosecution of persons responsible for the most serious crimes under international law committed in Syria since March 2011. We believe that this very mechanism, together with the independent International Commission of Inquiry on Syria, will facilitate and expedite fair and independent criminal proceedings in accordance with international law standards. Georgia has recently contributed financially to support the work of international impartial and independent mechanism. We condemn the destructive actions by the Assad regime to hinder the process of investigation, disregarding the recommendations provided in the relevant reports of the Commission and refusing to comply with the respective obligations under international human rights law and international humanitarian law. In conclusion, let me once again reiterate Georgia's full support to the joint efforts of the international community in ending impunity and bringing justice for Syrian people. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Many thanks to Georgia, and I now would like to give the floor to the United States.
Thank you all for including me in this important event. One minor footnote, my new title is Senior Director for the Middle East for the National Security Council, so I look forward to working with all of you in that new capacity. It's certainly an honor to be with this distinguished panel, especially Mr. Al-Abdallah of the Syria Justice and Accountability Center and Mr. Ghani of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. Thank you for your powerful remarks. The United States proudly supports the work of these groups and that of the International Impartial Investigative Mechanism. As President Trump said yesterday, if the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. Your important work will help us win that fight. The United States will continue to provide the diplomatic, political, financial, and moral support essential to ensure that there are real consequences for the atrocities committed in Syria, whether it be the thousands in arbitrary detention in Assad's prisons, those who have suffered and been killed by indiscriminate barrel bomb and chemical weapons attacks, or the many who have been exposed to the regime's starve and surrender tactics. The United States, and I know many of our allies and partners here, are committed to holding the perpetrators of atrocities in Syria accountable. Each instance of crimes against humanity that has affected a Syrian should be heard, and every individual Syrian should have the opportunity to seek justice. The IIIM is a vital mechanism that will help provide the prosecutors and investigators with the evidence needed to make the case during trial, thereby achieving a measure of justice for the many victims of the Assad regime atrocities. Today, we joined 6 other countries in an effort to reinvigorate the political process and to bring an end to the conflict in Syria that has taken over 500,000 lives. It is imperative to move forward with a political solution consistent with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. We are here today to help ensure that those who commit atrocities inside Syria are brought to justice. In other words, that evil will not triumph. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the United States. I now give the floor to Denmark.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank their excellencies, the ministers of foreign affairs of Liechtenstein and Qatar for hosting this event. Throughout this conflict, the regime's systematic use of barrel bombs, torture, extrajudicial executions and detentions as means of repression has been very well documented. Recently, we've witnessed other horrific violations of international humanitarian law and abuses of human rights with the regime's offensive in Dara, the targeted bombing of civilians and civilian facilities in Ghouta, and also denial of humanitarian access throughout Syria. Accountability and transitional justice play an important role in building the peace that must come from the negotiations in Geneva. The IIIM makes a crucial contribution to place responsibility for crimes and violations of international law. This is, of course, why Denmark has been a core supporter of the IIIM since its inception. Denmark supported Resolution 71/248 in the General Assembly to create the mechanism, and we're among the countries which provided the initial funding to get the mechanism up and running. IIIM's cooperation with other relevant organizations inside and outside of the UN is also absolutely crucial. And we support several civil society organizations and their efforts to secure documentation inside Syria here and now. However, accountability in the long term must also be pursued. That's why we'll continue to push for the UN Security Council to refer the conflict in Syria to the International Criminal Court. Denmark will continue our substantial support to the international and civil society organizations, working tirelessly to make sure that we can ensure accountability and bring an end to impunity in Syria. So let me on this note end by saying that I'm happy to announce that the Danish government has decided to support the important work of the Commission for International Justice and Accountability with a contribution of $630,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Denmark and as well for the pledge. I would now like to give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Hungary. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your efforts together with our colleagues from Qatar to work on the IIIM issue. Your efforts are much appreciated by us. I'm coming from Central Europe, a region on which the situation in the Middle East has a huge impact, and from a region which had to go through many difficulties, challenges, wars of freedom, in order to come to democracy and come to liberty and freedom being guaranteed. And we had to be faced with many attempts to interfere into our domestic issues, and in many occasions our region proved to be the playground of the big powers and empires. And nowadays, or at least in the past, Middle East had to go through similar kind of phenomena. So we pretty much understand the efforts and the endeavors which have been taking place in the Middle East and all around to guarantee freedom, liberty, and democracy. And we understand that in many places of the Middle East, security situation is at least unstable. That's at least what we can say. But it has a very negative impact on the entire European continent, but on Central Europe as well. So that's why I can tell you that the stability in the Middle East region is a clear and true European interest. We understand that in order to preserve stability or to reconstruct stability in the Middle East has a very important precondition that all those crimes which were committed
must be punished and penalized in a very strict and determined way. Because if we do not do so, then we will have no guarantee these crimes not to be repeated. And if we do not make sure that these crimes are not going to be repeated, we cannot help those communities who had to escape from this region to return. And then the question is, if the escaped communities do not return, then who will fill the gap and who will occupy the territories which have been left behind by the communities which have been living there basically for centuries or decades. I'm representing a Christian country, and that's why we feel responsibility for the Christian communities all over the world. And unfortunately, we experience in many places of the globe that the Christian communities have to be faced with the threat of elimination. And this is something that we have to avoid. And we have to understand that among all these crimes committed in Syria and in the surrounding areas, many of them were committed against the Christian community as well. So we have to make sure that all those communities which had been living in this area for not even only centuries but a millennium, they can return and they can reoccupy their homes. Since 1990, as you know, we are neighboring the territory of the former Yugoslavia. Since 1990, we have been actively supporting those international endeavors which aim to hold accountable those who heavily violated international law and humanitarian law. This was the situation in the territory of the former Yugoslavia as well. And as Hungary is being a member of the Human Rights Council, we have a special responsibility to call to account all those who commit such kind of crimes we are talking about. So that's why, although not to the extent, unfortunately, like Denmark, so maybe I should have spoken a little bit before not to, understand this change of this difference in dimension, but we have donated 50,000 euros to the mechanism last year and this year as well. But in the meantime, our understanding is that the independence and the proper operation of this mechanism could be only guaranteed if it is in the future part of the UN budget. And during our endeavors here within the UN, we will push for IIM to become part of the regular budget of the UN to make it sure that it will operate in a proper way as the founders have decided so. So Aurelia, once again, I really do appreciate your personal efforts and efforts of your colleagues as well, and you can count on our support in the future as well.
Thank you, Peter. I would now like to give the floor to Franz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Liechtenstein and Qatar for your leadership on this issue. I think we all agree on the magnitude of these crimes perpetrated in Syria against all the communities in Syria. Crime perpetrated mostly by the regime, but also by Daesh. And it's pretty clear that this crime must not go unpunished for legal reasons, because indeed perpetrators of war crimes, crimes against humanity must be held accountable, but also for political reasons, indeed, because there will be no peace process if there is no, if there is no justice. And in this regard, as you know, France has been very committed in making sure that there is an effective political process in Syria. So, Catherine, we've heard all your requests to make sure that the mechanism is able to work, and collectively we will work to make sure that precisely your needs are effectively addressed. That includes, of course, the financial dimension, and indeed we will make sure that assessed contributions are effectively used in this regard. Now, when it comes to France, so my government has referred these matters to the French judicial authorities following the publication of the Caesar case, which allowed for the opening of a criminal investigation into crimes against humanity in Syria. And of course, as you know, we supported the adoption of Resolution 71-248. France is deepened also its cooperation with your mechanism, and we're working actively to set up a legal framework to enable the exchange of relevant information and the disclosure of evidence required for the work of your mechanism, as well as for the work of the Paris public prosecutor. This is a complex process because is due to the unprecedented nature of the mechanism, but it is also an essential work for justice, for all the victims of the crimes in Syria, and for the future of a reconciliation process in Syria. Thank you.
Before I give the floor to Spain, I would kindly ask to remind you to limit your statements. I have I still have about 8 speakers on my list, and I would like to give as well the floor to the head of the White Helmets and a former detainee. So I would love to keep your statements, please, short. Thank you very much for the understanding.
Your instruction. Back in December 2016, Spain co-sponsored the creation of the IIIM. And almost 2 years later, we wish to congratulate you, Madam, for the progress you have accomplished since then as head of the mechanism in implementing the mandate you have received. Rendering justice for victims of the most serious crimes is essential to achieve sustainable peace, and this is why our commitment with the IIIM is political. Having said that, we also believe that we should be very careful to stick to the mandate in the resolution and refrain from any action that may play in the hands of those who oppose accountability in Syria. In other words, the political track should not intertwine with the legal one. There is continued impunity in Syria, and it remains imperative to ensure justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Spain. I now give the floor to Turkey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Minister. Turkey supports the international mechanisms investigating crimes against humanity and violations of the humanitarian law committed in Syria. We are one of the co-sponsors of the UN General Assembly resolution that established the IIIM, and we are making a modest but continuous financial contribution to the IIIM as a testament of our commitment to this mechanism. We welcome that the IIIM has become functional, and we congratulate and support Madame Márki-Öhel and her team in this regard, and we look forward to hosting her in Turkey in the near future. And the ongoing conflict in Syria does not facilitate the collection and documentation of evidence. The protracted crisis turned Syria into a theater of crimes against humanity conducted by both the regime and by non-state actors. The first challenge, we believe, before us is putting the record straight. Our collective efforts have to be guided by facts that are verifiable. We should avoid giving credit to fabricated claims that serve individual agendas of certain actors. And in this respect, we have to be vigilant against propaganda campaigns of terrorist organizations, including the PYD-YPG. The second challenge is devising the necessary means to address crimes such as the use of chemical weapons. After the abolition of the OPCW UN Joint Investigative Mechanism, the IIIM's mandate to investigate the use of chemical weapons has gained more importance. As we have strongly supported the joint investigative mechanisms, we will spare no efforts to extend our support to the IIIM as well in this regard. The third and undoubtedly the most difficult challenge is to prevent the reoccurrence of these crimes. And we believe that to deter the repetition of new chemical weapons attacks in Syria, we should keep up the pressure on the regime by documenting its crimes. We should voice aloud the message that there will be no impunity for perpetrators of these crimes. We should respond in deeds, not just in words, against such grave violations. And last but not least, we should not give the impression that we will be ready to act only if the regime attacks with chemical weapons. We should not lose sight of the fact that accountability cannot be fully ensured in the absence of a political solution. And most recently, and as Turkey, we have been doing our fair share to contribute to efforts for a credible and lasting political solution in Syria. And most recently, a looming catastrophe has been avoided in Idlib thanks to Turkey's efforts and its engagement with Russia and Iran. We averted, at least for the foreseeable future, the occurrence of new war crimes and crimes against humanity. That said, sustained engagement and pressure of the international community will be key in preventing new atrocities. Thank you.
Many thanks to Turkey, and I would now like to give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you. My Minister, Alistair Burt, has asked me to thank Liechtenstein, Qatar, and of course Catherine for the amazing work that the IIIM is doing. 8 years into the conflict in Syria, the appalling suffering of millions of Syrians continues, and we've heard today accounts of the horrific reports of violations of international law and abuses of human rights. Now, I have a long set of things to say, but I'll cut to the key point, which is the UK is proud to have co-sponsored the General Assembly resolution which has established the IIIM and to have contributed to its start-up costs. We've also provided funds for NGOs like the Commission for International Justice and Accountability, which have amassed hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence and human rights violations, often at great personal risk to individuals. Today, having listened to your call for funds, I'm able to announce that the UK government will give a further £250,000. I checked, that's about $325,000, so we're not quite there with Denmark, but to support the continuing ongoing work of the IIIM. So we will not... Thank you. We will not waver in our pursuits of accountability for the crimes committed in Syria. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the Special Envoy to the Syria crisis, Ambassador of Sweden.
I will try to be brief and clear. All those responsible for breaches of international law in Syria must be held accountable. Some of these breaches may constitute war crimes or crimes against humanity. Accountability and impartial justice is an essential component of any peace, and in this regard I want to underline the important role of IIIM, of which Sweden is a strong supporter, the Commission of Inquiry, and human rights organizations and defenders in documenting violations and abuses. Gathering evidence in preparation for legal action is a very important task. Full support for this must be given highest priority. When avenues for international justice are unavailable, the prosecution of war crimes under national jurisdiction represents an important contribution towards securing justice. And we need to push for third country jurisdiction while strengthening international cooperation between national judicial authorities and international mechanisms such as the IIIM. National prosecution has an important value as it provides victims with dignity and strengthens the confidence of the Syrian people in future justice. And in closing, cooperation between states and the mechanism set up by the UN is crucial. In Sweden, criminal investigations and trials for crimes committed in Syria during the conflict have taken place, and more investigations are underway. The National Prosecutor's Office in Sweden cooperates closely with and is in close contact with the Commission of Inquiry and IIIM. And in closing, finally, Sweden will continue to demand full respect for international law and support efforts for accountability. Impunity must never be an option, and evil must never triumph. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Sweden. I would now like to give the floor to the Director General for International Order from Germany.
And thank you very much for organizing this meeting and for your leadership on this very important issue. Germany fully supports the efforts aimed at ensuring accountability for the unspeakable crimes committed in Syria. Perpetrators must ultimately be held accountable for these unspeakable crimes. Because we have to be sure that without justice, there can be no conflict resolution, no reconciliation, and no sustainable peace in Syria. We would like to reaffirm our full support to the IIIM. And we also join others and the Secretary General's call to ensure sustainable and long-term funding of the IIIM. As long as this funding is not assured out of the regular budget, Germany will continue its voluntary contributions, which so far amount to €2 million. I haven't made the calculation what that means in dollars. We are especially happy that the IIIM, according to its mandate, also looks into the use of chemical weapons in Syria. Because the use of chemical weapons is completely unacceptable, and there can be no impunity for the perpetrators. Germany has repeatedly called on Syria to finally declare and destroy its complete chemical weapons program and honors its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. I think what is especially important, because of the manifold tasks you have, is that the IIIM closely cooperates with the OPCW and especially with the newly implemented attribution mechanism, that you continue to work with the coalition of inquiry, but also with civil society and NGOs. And be assured that we will fully support your important work. Thank you.
Thank you to Germany. I would now like to give the floor to Canada.
I think we have many challenges in front of us, not only one of time, but also one of money. And we certainly heard the call to continue to provide funding to the IIIM as a key pillar of the accountability. If I may add to the challenge or to the task, I think we also need to continue to support not only a pillar of accountability, but the foundation of accountability, which is the NGOs and civil society, many of whom are represented here today, for their courageous work in collecting the evidence and supporting the victims. So in that spirit, I'll save my minute that I have left to hear from organizations such as the White Helmets and Families for Freedom. Thank you.
Many, many thanks to Canada. Can I now give the floor to Human Rights Watch? Richard, where are you? Oh, it's, yeah. Not Richard.
Thank you to the co-organizers, Liechtenstein and Qatar, for organizing this event. Excellencies, for victims who have known nothing but suffering, despair, and abandonment, the creation of the IIIM represents one significant step in the difficult struggle to address the impunity that has marked this bloody conflict. We are encouraged by the progress made over the past year to operationalize the IIIM, but this is going to be a long haul. We urge UN member states to ensure the mechanism has the vital political and financial backing it needs to carry out its mandate. The cooperation of states, the UN system, as well as civil society will remain crucial. But the IIIM's work should only be seen as one part of a collective push needed to bring justice to victims in Syria. Governments that supported the creation of the mechanism should remain steadfast in seeking accountability for victims, whether at the Security Council, the General Assembly, or through other avenues, including national courts. But these types of national cases come with limitations, will not be enough on their own, and highlight the need for a more comprehensive justice process. What the IIIM experience tells us is that in the absence of traditional venues for the pursuit of justice, there are ways to be creative in achieving accountability. Committed governments, alongside civil society, should continue to find innovative ways to fill the justice gap. Importantly, in any negotiation to resolve the Syrian conflict and alongside any post-conflict reconstruction efforts, accountability must remain on the agenda. Too often we have seen accountability traded away with the aim of ending a conflict, but history makes clear that there will be no enduring peace in Syria without justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I now give the floor to the Center for Rule of Law and Good Governance? Then it will be the Global Center for Responsibility and then the White Helmets. Not here. Good. So it will be Simon, the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect. You have the floor, Simon.
Thank you, Minister. I'm very conscious of the time. It's about 2 minutes till the next meeting is going to come in here, and it's a meeting I'm actually chairing. So in light of that, I have a brilliant statement which I will put online, but I'd prefer to give my time to my friends at the White Helmets.
Thank you. So I give the floor to the White Helmets. It's Raed Saleh.
شكرا جزيلا أول شيء.
I would like to thank everybody for having me here. I would like to thank all the organizers for this session, because I expect this session to be very important for the Syrian to reach justice for the victims that fell through the 7 years that passed. Unfortunately, a week ago, I left Syria after we attended the bombing that happened on Jisr al-Shukur and Sheikhun and other regions, and did not stop. But after all the efforts that was exerted by Turkey to the diplomatic and there was a general sense of ease with the Syrian people, and I, as a representative of the government of Turkey, I would like to thank the Syrians who are present in Idlib that protected over 3 million people by this agreement. Today, we are in need for justice in Syria. We have reports, international reports that were issued from investigative panels, especially the cooperative investigation that was issued from the Security Council per the decision 217, which said that the Syrian regime has used the chemical weapon in Sheikhun on April 4, 2017, and it resulted in over 70 deaths and over many injuries. We don't need new mechanisms. We need a court that's specialized in the crimes committed in Syria. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of documentations and evidences and tens of thousands of videos and pictures that document the crimes in prisons and crimes that were committed daily in Ghouta, East Ghouta, Dara, Zabadani, War, and Harif in Damascus and Idlib, and the use of chemical weapons in the city of Douma. We need today that we communicate with the conscience of the politicians, so there would be an asserted decision to look at the cases in order to bring justice for the Syrian victims. For as long there is discussions in the Security Council, we are going to find more than 7 vetoes that were used, that Russia used in 2017 to stop the investigations of the use of the chemical weapons. I would like to thank you for allowing me to speak, and because of how tight the time is, I would like to thank you.
Intervention. I give the floor to the last speaker. It's Amina Kulani, a former detainee who witnessed torture herself.
Thank you for allowing me to speak here today in the name of all the families, the Syrian families. I'm here today to speak in the name of every woman who was imprisoned in Syria since I was in prison with the Syrian regime, and in the name of all mothers, wives, and daughters of anyone who was imprisoned by the Syrian regime or any party in the conflict. But I'm talking mostly about the Syrian regime, since they are the most they committed the most atrocities. It's not just a matter of numbers, but these are stories of lives, of families. Every number and every deceased person and every family that was destroyed after that person was arrested and imprisoned. It's not just a matter of using chemical weapons, but it's also the biggest violation is the killing by torture from the Syrian regime. I am a sister of 3 martyrs that were detained in 2011 and were killed under torture, after torture by the Syrian regime. Of course, all this talk, and I'm talking today, I know the number of detainees increases and the number of martyrs increases under torture. My mother has a message. Let me carry a message for everybody present here. Till when will the world wait for Bashar al-Assad to be punished for all his crimes? Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am here in the name of Families for Freedom. I would like to thank everybody present.
participation. Thank you for your contribution, your solidarity, and your support. I think we should continue to be optimistic that justice will prevail. The failure of IIIM is not an option. The failure of the IIIM is a failure to the international community, I guess, as a whole. I think we should continue to win. We need to win this fight against war criminals, regardless of the faith of the victims. I hope we go beyond the documentations and press, as Netherlands said, on the ICC referral. We should be creative, innovative in terms of our legal approach and think about other ideas. How can we prosecute those who commit these atrocities? Once again, thank you very much, and I will give the floor to Your Excellency to conclude as well.
Many thanks. A big thank you goes to Qatar and my esteemed panelists for sharing this discussion together with me. I would like to say thank you for all the countries that have pledged some money for the voluntary funding for next year, for all the ones that are going to support that it's going and enter into the ordinary budget. And I would like to thank the two people that have spoken last for sharing your experiences together with us. I think impunity, that's not an option. We have to continue the path we have taken together. And Catherine, for you, we rely and we are a little bit in your hands with the success of this mechanism. So thank you to everybody for having been here.